Hello, everybody out there. This is the New World Gamer here, back with a review of the 2012 Capcom title Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Now, this game, for the most part, has been pretty much getting flack from a lot of major review outlets. They don't like the game, they find it mediocre, and for the most part, they're right. There's a lot of stuff in this game that Resident Evil fans will appreciate, but if you have no familiarity with Resident Evil at all, this game is not going to be worth playing. And that's because there's a lot of elements in the game that are rather detrimental to that enjoyment. Elements such as shooting, for the most part, where the game focuses on immensely, is sort of haphazardly done. But before we get into some of the negative aspects of the game, let's focus back on the story. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City begins with you being part of an elite team that has to go in and basically clean up everything that went wrong with Raccoon City. Where this includes reactivating the Nemesis creature, finding data, destroying individuals. These all culminate in you just basically being the bad guys working for Umbrella. And from that perspective, the game, story-wise, is rather unique because you never really played as these sort of individuals before. You were always going up against the Umbrella Corporation or some other entities of the Umbrella Corporation when you played the Resident Evil games. To have like kind of that reverse side here was both, I guess, pleasing from a gameplay perspective, especially if you're a fan of the series, and also just because it's kind of kick-ass to play as the bad guys at times. And this game really does delve into that aspect. You can do all kinds of stuff to kill anything that stands in your way. You almost feel invincible. And in that regard, the gameplay loses some of its originality when it comes to these aspects because you don't really feel that you're in a Resident Evil game. You just feel like you're plodding through thousands of monsters and zombies and other enemies and whatnot, and you can't be stopped. Or else, if you looked at some of the previous Resident Evil games, they always built on the aspect of fear, of death, of necessity to survive through any means possible. Where in this game, you're kind of like, yeah, you're part of a team. There's even some jokes that some of the other team members make about, oh yeah, we're going to have to take out this monster. Let's do it, kind of attitude, where it's just like they don't have no fear of dying or anything. They know they're going to get through the mission regardless. And that really kind of distracts from a fan's perspective, at least from my perspective as a fan of the Resident Evil game series, because you're not really feeling scared. For me, I bring this up real quick. Resident Evil 5 was not really scary to me, and those kind of traits kind of carried over into this game, where it's more action-oriented. There's really nothing scary in this game at all. Of course, you fight a multitude of zombies at times, and they kind of gang up on you, but that's not really scary at all. There's like lickers and hunters and whatnot too, but those aren't really elements that make the game interesting. These are elements you've seen before in other games. So to kind of have it return to that is both owed to the fan base and basically just because they want to reuse monsters they had in old games to have some familiarity. Let me return, though, to focusing on if you're not familiar with Resident Evil at all. This game, if you have no familiarity with Resident Evil universe, will seem mediocre. This is more of a fan's game. If you're going to play this game, you got to know who Chris Redfield is, who the Umbrella Corporation is, why you're doing these things, where Raccoon City is, how it's been affected by the G virus and T virus and whatnot. So those elements really help in expanding the scope of the game from a game player's perspective. But if you're just coming into this game saying, oh, well, I'm just going to play through it because it looks fun, you're not going to understand half the stuff that's going on. And in itself, you're not going to find that much enjoyment in it. As you would say if you're a fan of the game and you kind of, oh yeah, we're going back into Raccoon City. There's certain elements in the previous games where, oh yeah, that's that character, or William Birkin, he comes back into the picture here. Those elements are not going to sort of fly with people who aren't familiar with the game. And I think this is where Operation Raccoon City really hinges on it being successful in the fans' eyes. This is the game where you're going to go back as a fan and say, I'm going to play through it again and maybe learn something different about the whole Resident Evil universe. But just from a singular game playing experience with no attachment to the player at all, Operation Raccoon City is not necessarily a good game. It's riddled with a lot of difficult game-playing maneuvers that you just find rather annoying after playing it through the game for so long. When I played it, it was like the first thing I noticed that was wrong with the game was the aiming in the game. It's ridiculously confusing because there will be times where you get headshots on characters, but the game doesn't register it, or times where you just literally waste entire clips on characters and they don't go down. Now, I'm assuming this is understandable given some of the biological weapons you fight or creatures, but when you're fighting against humans and you're just shooting the you-know-what out of them and they don't go down, that is extremely frustrating from a game player's perspective. It's just like they artificially enforce enemies in the game to make them more difficult for you, even though they're dumb as dirt, including your team if you play single player, because they are extremely atrociously moronic at times. They'll run through trip mines. They will shoot or not shoot enemies, which is infuriating. And they're just plain moronic. There's no point in having them on your team if they're going to do all these stupid things. And then the most awkward part is having to go back to save them because they died from one enemy when they're supposed to be up there with you fighting. So the AI is not particularly smart. It's frustrating to play through when it comes to that aspect of the game, including the shooting too. But also, one gripe that I have with it too, it's just the story is not really as strong as I would like it to be. It's rather superficial, even though they're going sort of backtracking on the whole Resident Evil universe and telling you what transpires in between, like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. It still doesn't seem as in-depth as, say, Resident Evil 1's story. There's no sort of motivation for what you're doing as a character besides just being this bad Umbrella employee who is not afraid to run through a mountain or a city full of zombies and other biological creatures with ease. That removes the tension from the game for me. There's not a lot of times in the game where I felt scared. It was just like, I got enough ammo, I'm ready to go. And then you really don't find out from a conclusive standpoint anything that you would have or could have just read off a Resident Evil wiki that's already out before the game even came out. A lot of stuff in the game has already been showcased, but just from a different perspective. So it's kind of, I dare say, it's pointless story-wise. But the one element that the game succeeds in is its multiplayer. There's co-op campaign, which is always fun because you're actually playing with live people, besides the game's sort of missed opportunities when it comes to gameplay being still prevalent in that mode. But it's always fun to play with people who actually, like shoot correctly and not run through trip mines on purpose unless they just want to have fun, like the AI would do. The AI would do that on purpose for no apparent reason. They have to go back and save them. And there's versus modes too, which are also fun. The game online has some cool features that coincide with a single player experience where you can basically level up your character and buy or purchase abilities or new weapons, which kind of brings that whole addicting atmosphere back to the game where you have to level up to unlock new things that you see a lot of times in newer first-person shooters or just other games in general. But when you look at it from the perspective of it as a experience, Operation Raccoon City is there to fulfill a certain demographics expectations. And even then, it is either success or failure on how you approach the series overall. They're trying something new. I think it's an interesting move for Capcom to be doing this. But overall, I think this game is more worth it for fans of the series than those who aren't. The asking price for the game, new, being at $60, I think is a little too high given that this game can be beaten in around, I'll say around 8 hours. It can probably be beaten. And then it kind of relies on the whole aspect of you going online or going through the campaign, single player campaign again, or just going into versus mode to kind of expand on it. But then again, I think more time should have been utilized to improve the shooting, which the game heavily relies on, and also sort of expanding the scope of its story to allow certain characters from past games to sort of re-enter and not just focus on this tiny elite group of individuals who are basically covering up for Umbrella. With that in mind, I think Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City is a decent game. I just wish that more could have been done to it to make it a better experience, but that could always be done in sequels if they want to follow through with that route. For where it stands right now, I don't necessarily think it's a good game. Even if you're a fan of the series, you will find certain enjoyment in it, but still, looking at it from just a singular experience, Operation Raccoon City is a game that is frustrating to play through even for the most hardcore Resident Evil fans. Anyways, this is New World Gamer here, signing off. Thanks for watching.